I was sitting at my desk, flipping through a stack of documents, when I noticed two figures through the staff room window. They were dressed in security uniforms, clipboards in hand, and inspecting my workspace. The feeling in the pit of my stomach was instant. My heart sank. I knew exactly what was happening, and I knew exactly who was behind it. I glanced at the clock. 9:30 a.m. Too early for an inspection, too late for it to be a coincidence. I pushed my chair back, the wheels creaking under the weight of the tension building up inside me. There was no way this was routine. I knew Iris Vance had been behind this. For months she'd been trying to discredit me, whispering doubts, planting seeds of mistrust. All it had taken was a few complaints about improper documentation and mishandling of artifacts. And here we were. The security officers were going through my files with the kind of thoroughness that felt more like an accusation than a procedure. Iris wasn't even trying to hide it. I stood up, and before I could second-guess myself, I was walking toward the staff room door. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The door creaked as I pushed it open, stepping into the hallway. I caught sight of Iris, pretending to organize files in a nearby corner, her face tilted down just enough to avoid meeting my eyes. The fact that she was acting so casual, like this was just another normal day, made my blood run colder. I didn't give her the satisfaction of addressing her directly. Instead, I turned my focus to the officers, who hadn't noticed me yet. One of them, a younger man, caught my eye, his face blank as he jotted something down on his clipboard. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, my voice calm, but the underlying edge unmistakable. The officer paused, then glanced at his partner before nodding toward me. "We're conducting a routine inspection," he said, as if that was supposed to explain everything. "Routine inspection," I repeated, the words slipping out like they were foreign to my tongue. For what? His colleague, an older woman with graying hair, looked up from the paperwork she was flipping through. Reports came in about improper documentation and mishandling of artifacts. It's standard procedure to investigate when such reports are made. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. The reports. The ones Iris had quietly filed the moment she thought no one was paying attention. It wasn't about the documents or the artifacts, though. It was about her carefully orchestrated campaign to make me look incompetent. And now it was working. I forced a smile, even as 1,000 thoughts ran through my head, each one darker than the last. "Well, you've certainly come at a strange time, don't you think?" I said. "I've been here almost 3 years, and this is the first time I've ever heard of such an inspection." The younger officer seemed to pick up on the tension in my voice. He hesitated, looking back at his partner before responding. "It's routine. We're just following protocol." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Iris had set this up. No doubt in my mind. I turned my attention back to Iris, who was still pretending to be busy with her files. But I knew the truth. She was watching. She was waiting. This was her show, and I was just the star who hadn't realized his lines were being fed to him. "Fine," I said, crossing my arms. "If you're here for a routine inspection, then I suppose I'll be on my way." I took a deliberate step back, making sure my movements were measured, controlled. "I'll just let you do your thing." I didn't wait for their response. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the staff room. As I passed Iris, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. She was staring at me now, her face tight, but I couldn't bring myself to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. Instead, I went back to my desk. The weight of what was happening settled over me, but I pushed it away. I couldn't let her win. I wouldn't. This inspection, it wasn't about procedure. It was personal. And Iris had just crossed a line. I picked up my phone, typing a quick message to my closest colleague, Daniel. "Iris is behind this. I need your help." As I hit send, I couldn't help but wonder how far Iris was willing to go to destroy me. But I wouldn't let her. Not without a fight. Not today. And I was done being her victim. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on the report in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to the inspection. The officers were gone, but the feeling of tension still lingered in the air like an unwanted guest. I picked up a pen, tapping it against the desk as I thought about the last few months. About Iris. She had always been a thorn in my side, but I hadn't realized how deeply she'd been trying to undermine me until it was almost too late. It started small, just little jabs here and there. She'd find a way to make her suggestions sound like they were meant to be helpful, When I mentioned a new way to organize the files, she'd come back the next day with a better method, one that was far more complicated and time-consuming. At first, I didn't see the pattern. I thought she was just a bit too hands-on, a little too eager to contribute. But then I started noticing her behavior more closely. She was always around when I was working late, always hovering when I had a meeting with the senior curator. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a little bit of professional rivalry. But it wasn't just rivalry anymore. It was something darker. I remember the first time it really clicked. It was about 6 months ago. I had secured a new exhibit, one that would bring in a lot of attention to the museum. I had spent weeks researching, contacting collectors, and negotiating terms. The moment I presented it to the board, I knew it was a game changer. Iris was the first to congratulate me, but there was something cold about her praise. I shrugged it off at the time, but I shouldn't have. She immediately inserted herself into the project, offering assistance with the cataloging and display. At first, I thought it was just her usual enthusiasm. But when I looked more closely at the way she'd positioned herself in the background of every meeting, the subtle suggestions she'd made to the curators, and the way she undermined my expertise in front of the team, I realized what she was doing. She wasn't just trying to outshine me, she was trying to make me look bad. Her manipulations had started small, but they grew with each passing day. She began tracking my hours, when I arrived at the museum, how long I spent on certain tasks. She'd ask leading questions about my work, like, "Are you sure you've reviewed all the documentation?" Or, "Did you check that artifact's provenance again?" All of it calculated to plant doubt in the minds of anyone who might be watching. I realized she wasn't just competitive. She was trying to get me fired, trying to get me out of the picture. But it was more than just professional envy. It was something more personal, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then the whispers started. I had been in the middle of a tour when I first overheard one of the junior archivists. She didn't realize I was standing right behind her, talking to another employee about Clara's sloppiness, and how she can never seem to keep up with the new procedures. It was the kind of comment that, if I hadn't known better, I would have thought was an isolated incident. But after that, I started hearing it everywhere, through the staff room walls, at the water cooler, from colleagues who didn't want to say anything, but I knew Iris had to be behind it. She was the one who had been whispering in everyone's ears, planting doubts about my competence. At first, I had tried to ignore it. I tried to brush off the gossip, the raised eyebrows whenever I walked into a room. But that day, when the security officers arrived at my desk, I realized just how far she was willing to go. It wasn't just a professional rivalry anymore. It was a calculated effort to destroy me. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples as the weight of it all pressed down on me. I had worked my entire career to earn the respect of my colleagues, to prove that I belonged here. And now, thanks to Iris, it felt like I was losing everything. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Daniel. "Iris is playing dirty, but I've got your back. Let's talk later." I smiled faintly. Daniel had been with me through all of this. He knew about the late nights, the ridiculous demands from management, and the way Iris had tried to squeeze her way into every project I worked on. He knew what it meant to be a woman in a male-dominated field, trying to prove yourself while dealing with people who didn't think you were good enough. The thought of Daniel's support gave me a brief moment of comfort. But it didn't last long. The reality was, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep fighting this battle alone. I stood up and grabbed my coat, deciding I needed a break. A walk would do me some good, clear my head for a bit. But as I walked toward the door, I stopped. I turned back to my desk, hesitating for a moment before I picked up the gratitude journal I had started a few weeks ago. It wasn't much, just a simple leather-bound notebook, where I wrote down positive things that had happened during my day. It could be something small, like a colleague offering to help with a task, or a visitor complimenting an exhibit. But lately, I'd started writing down more than just the good moments. I started recording the times someone had shown me kindness, even when I didn't ask for it. And strangely enough, those small moments seemed to outweigh the negativity Iris was feeding into the workplace. I tucked the journal into my bag and left the office. It wasn't much of a plan, but right now, the only thing I could do was hold on to what little light I could find in the midst of this darkness. And maybe, just maybe, the next time Iris tried to tear me down, it would be her actions, not mine, that would be exposed. As I walked through the museum's halls, the weight of the last few days clung to me like a thick fog. Iris was playing her game well, and I could feel the walls closing in. Her whispers were working. Slowly but surely, they were starting to erode the trust I had spent years building. I had to do something, and I had to do it fast. Back at my desk, I sat down, staring at the screen. The inspection was just the beginning. The security officers, though they'd left, had done their job. Iris had done her job. They'd poked at the cracks, but now I had to seal them up before the whole thing crumbled. A plan formed in my mind, one I wasn't entirely proud of, but it was the only way I could see to turn the tide. If Iris was documenting my mistakes, I could turn the tables. I could make her think she had a clear case against me, only for it to fall apart in the end. And when it did, everyone would see her for what she really was. I opened my files. There were always small mistakes, typos, misfiled documents, minor inconsistencies. Nothing that would ever make a significant difference, but enough to make someone with the right agenda start picking at them. The truth was, I was meticulous, perhaps too meticulous for my own good. I had the need to be perfect, to keep everything in order. But even the best of us slip up sometimes. And right now, I was going to make sure Iris thought I was slipping up big time. I spent the next few hours purposefully planting small, inconspicuous errors. A mislabeled photo in one of the artifact files, a date discrepancy in an exhibit timeline, a minor typo in the cataloging system. Nothing major, nothing that would jeopardize the collection or the museum's reputation, but enough to make it look like I wasn't doing my job properly. Enough to make Iris believe I was slipping up, just like she'd been hoping. It wasn't the kind of tactic I usually relied on. I hated playing games, hated the thought of manipulating situations like this, but I had no choice. If Iris was going to accuse me of incompetence, I had to give her a reason to believe it. And if she thought she had enough ammunition to take me down, then maybe, just maybe, she'd stop digging. After making sure everything was in place, I sat back and exhaled. Feeling the tension in my chest loosen, just slightly, it was done. Iris was going to think she had all the evidence she needed to get rid of me, and she was going to make her move soon. But I'd already anticipated that. I wasn't going to wait for her to act. I was going to turn her own plan against her. I glanced at the gratitude journal I'd tucked into my bag earlier. I hadn't written in it for a few days, the weight of everything weighing me down too much to focus on anything positive. But today, I felt like I could do it. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't the person Iris was trying to make me out to be, that I wasn't going to be her punching bag, not anymore. I grabbed the journal and opened to the last page. The ink still looked fresh, the words that had been written on days when things were calmer. The journal wasn't just about the good moments. It was about recognizing what I had accomplished, what I had built despite everything. I picked up the pen and wrote a quick entry. Today, I stood up for myself. I'm not perfect, but I am enough. The words felt like a quiet declaration, a reminder to myself that I wasn't going to let Iris win. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. She might think she had the upper hand, but I was starting to realize that this game was bigger than just her. It was about more than just protecting my reputation. It was about taking control of my own story, my own career. I closed the journal and slid it back into my bag, feeling a little more grounded, a little more in control of the situation. The phone buzzed on my desk, pulling me back into the present. It was a message from Daniel. Iris has already started compiling the evidence. She's got a folder titled Clara Bennett's Performance Concerns. I think it's time we take the next step. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't let the anxiety show. I had been expecting this. I had known Iris wouldn't waste time. She would jump at the opportunity to strike while she thought I was vulnerable. But now, I had a plan. And for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. I typed a quick response. I'm ready. Let's do this. The game was on. And this time, Iris wasn't going to win. The next morning, the museum buzzed with its usual energy, but the weight of the inspection still hung in the air like a thick fog. I tried to keep my head down, work as usual, but I knew today was going to be different. Iris was probably already rubbing her hands together in anticipation, convinced she'd found the cracks in my armor, but I wasn't worried. I had already set my plan in motion, and now it was just a waiting game. Around mid-morning, the security officers reappeared. The younger one, the one who had seemed a bit unsure of himself, walked toward my desk. He didn't meet my gaze as he approached, his eyes focused on the folder he was holding. "Clara," he said, his voice lacking the casual confidence it had the day before. "We've finished our review. We just need to take a look at your gratitude journal, if you don't mind." I stared at him, an eyebrow raised. "My gratitude journal?" Yeah," he said, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. "We noticed it during the inspection. It's a bit unusual. We'd like to know more about it." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. I hadn't expected them to take an interest in my journal, but now that they were, I had to be careful with how I handled it. I'd started the journal as a way to keep track of the positive moments at work, to remind myself of the good days, but it had become more than that. It was now my personal record of everything that had gone right, despite the stress Iris was causing. "Of course," I said, standing up and walking over to my desk. "You can have a look, but I assure you, it's just a personal practice. It's nothing official." I opened the journal, flicking through the pages, my fingers brushing over the neat, handwritten notes I had carefully documented over the past few months. The officer's eyes lingered on the pages as he flipped through them, his brows furrowing slightly. "Why did you start this?" he asked, his voice still uncertain. "It seems like a lot of effort for something personal." I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. "It's a way for me to reflect on the positive interactions I have here. You know, the moments that remind me why I'm doing this job in the first place." He nodded, but his eyes kept flicking over the pages. I could tell he was starting to feel the weight of the situation, and I saw the slightest hesitation before he turned to the last few pages. I had been careful to record only the positive moments in the journal, but there was one thing I hadn't expected. I had never written about Iris, never mentioned her name, not once. The journal was filled with genuine moments of appreciation for my colleagues, small acts of kindness, and collaborative successes. But there was no mention of Iris, and I knew this was going to stand out. As the officer read through the last few pages, I watched his face change, his expression hardening slightly. The other officer, the older woman, glanced over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the pages as well. Clara," the younger officer said after a long pause. We noticed something here. You haven't mentioned Iris Vance at all, not even once." I forced myself to smile, though I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't feel the need to document every interaction," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's not about who I mention, it's about recognizing the positive things that happen during the day." But even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of the silence in the room. They were both looking at me now, and I could tell they were starting to piece things together. The journal, which had seemed so harmless at first, was now becoming a tool I hadn't intended it to be. The younger officer's voice broke the silence. "I understand, but, well, the absence of any mention of Iris here, it's a bit concerning. It almost seems like there's some tension, maybe. And the fact that you've documented everyone else, well, it's hard to ignore that." I nodded, trying to keep the panic in check. This was exactly what I had feared. The journal was meant to be a tool for positivity, but now it was painting me as the one who had problems. The one who couldn't even acknowledge the colleague who had been causing trouble. The very same colleague who had orchestrated this whole inspection. The older officer cleared her throat. "Clara, we're not saying there's anything wrong, but given the situation, we're going to have to take a closer look at this. We'll need a bit more time." I stood there, nodding silently, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way to explain this, to make it all go away, but I didn't have time to explain. They were already walking away, the folder of my gratitude journal in hand. As they left, I couldn't help but feel a sinking sense of dread in my stomach. The journal, the one thing I thought was a small personal practice, was now working against me. Iris had manipulated the situation perfectly, but what she didn't realize was that I had a backup plan of my own. I had already anticipated the possibility of her making something out of nothing. I had been documenting more than just the positive moments. I had been documenting her too, in a different way. I had been keeping track of the small manipulations, the quiet whispers, the way she'd made everything feel like my fault. All without saying it outright. She thought she was the one pulling the strings. But in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd been playing this game all along. And when the officers returned with their findings, I was going to make sure the last laugh was mine. The next morning, the atmosphere at the museum felt different. A shift in the air, a quiet undercurrent that had replaced the usual buzz of conversation. Word had gotten out. The inspection hadn't just been a routine check. It had become a point of conversation among the staff, with some side eyes lingering on me, some whispers barely muffled behind closed doors. Iris's plot was working, and I could feel it. I'd done everything I could to prepare myself for this moment, but even so, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. I had hoped the officers would see through Iris's manipulations, that they'd recognize her for what she truly was, but I couldn't be sure. As I entered the staff room, I immediately noticed the subtle change in my colleagues' behavior. There were fewer smiles, a slight chill in the air that hadn't been there before. People exchanged awkward glances when I walked in, then quickly looked away, pretending to focus on their work. It wasn't overt, but it was there. The seeds of doubt Iris had planted were already taking root. I had barely taken 2 steps into the room when Daniel, my one ally, approached me with a concerned look on his face. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Clara, I don't know what's going on, but people are talking. They're starting to believe the worst. There's this weird vibe now." I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, though I could feel the tightness in my chest. "I know," I said softly, glancing around the room. "Iris has been working overtime to turn everyone against me. But we're not done yet." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just about cleaning up my reputation anymore. It was about taking control back from Iris and using this situation to my advantage. "Listen," I said, "I've been thinking. Iris wants to paint me as the incompetent one, right? Well, I'm going to give her exactly what she's looking for. I'm going to let her believe she's won." Daniel frowned, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was a cold, deliberate one. "I'm going to let her collect all the evidence she thinks she needs to take me down. I'll plant some more mistakes. Let her think she's got me cornered. But once she's got everything she wants, I'm going to turn the tables on her." Daniel stared at me for a moment, processing what I was saying. "You're playing the long game." "Exactly." I leaned in closer, my voice barely a whisper. "I know what she's doing, Daniel. I know what she's trying to build. But what she doesn't know is that I've been keeping track too. I've been paying attention to her, and once she's done collecting her so-called evidence, I'm going to expose her. All of it, the manipulation, the lies, the whispers, everything." Daniel's eyes narrowed in understanding, and he nodded slowly. "I see. You're not just going to clear your name. You're going to bury hers." "That's the plan," I said, my voice steady with conviction. "I'm not going down without a fight." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching, and I quickly straightened up, forcing my smile back into place. Iris, as expected, appeared in the doorway, her expression a perfect mask of professional indifference. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes flicking over me with that sharp, calculating look. Then, without a word, she walked past, heading straight to the storage room. I watched her go, my blood boiling under my skin. Every time I saw her, every little thing she did, I could feel my anger growing. But I couldn't act on it. Not yet. Not until the moment was right. That afternoon, the email came. It was from the higher-ups, the ones who had likely been briefed on the ongoing inspection and the supposed findings. The subject line was simple: "Performance Review, Clara Bennett." I opened the email with a strange sense of detachment. I had already predicted the contents. There would be vague mentions of documentation concerns, artifact mishandling, and performance discrepancies. It was all so familiar now, the way they would dress up these accusations, make them sound official, yet hollow. Iris had done her part, and now it was time for the institution to play their role. I scrolled through the email, my eyes scanning the words that I knew weren't true. But I didn't get angry. Instead, I took a deep breath and smiled grimly. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was going to let them continue thinking I was the problem. Let them continue this charade while I quietly worked behind the scenes to gather everything I needed. And when the time came, I would be ready. Iris's web of lies would come undone, and the truth would be revealed. But first, I needed to act quickly. The moment was slipping away, and if I wasn't careful, I'd be buried under the weight of her accusations. I turned back to my desk, feeling the calm settle over me, and began drafting a new email, a response to the performance review. I wasn't going to defend myself, not yet. Instead, I was going to offer them something Iris hadn't expected: transparency. By the time I finished, the email was concise, professional, and filled with just the right amount of openness to make the higher-ups pause and think. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, feeling the brief surge of satisfaction that always came after taking control of a situation. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was Daniel. Iris is starting to circle. She's already talking to the higher-ups about you again. I think they're buying her story. You sure about this plan? I didn't hesitate. I knew what I had to do. I'm sure. Let her think she's winning. She's about to be exposed. I set my phone down, eyes fixed on the screen in front of me. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was finally playing it on my terms. And when this was over, it would be Iris who was left in the rubble of her own making. The next move was mine, and this time, I wasn't going to lose. The days following my performance review email were a blur of quiet tension. Iris had clearly gone into full battle mode, circling the higher-ups, whispering her version of events to anyone who would listen. I could feel the pressure mounting around me, but I kept my head down, focusing on the task at hand. It wasn't long before my inbox pinged again. This time, it wasn't from the higher-ups. It was an email from the museum director, Mr. Langford. The subject was straightforward. Request for a meeting, Clara Bennett. My stomach dropped. I had a sinking feeling I knew what this was about. I clicked open the email. It was polite, formal, and completely neutral in tone. Mr. Langford wanted to discuss the recent inspection and my performance review. It was an invitation, but I could tell it was more than that. The way he worded the message, it felt like an opportunity for him to hear me out, but also an opportunity for him to see if I'd crack under pressure. I took a deep breath. This was my chance. I wasn't going to sit back and let Iris's lies fester any longer. I needed to take control of the narrative. So, I composed my response quickly, deliberately. Subject: request for a meeting. Dear Mr. Langford, thank you for reaching out to schedule a meeting. I believe the recent inspection has raised several concerns, and I'd be more than happy to discuss them in person. However, before we meet, I would like to clarify a few points. As you know, I've been at the museum for several years and have always done my utmost to maintain the highest standards in my work. While I am open to constructive feedback, I want to make it clear that I am committed to transparency. If there are issues with my performance, I would appreciate the opportunity to address them openly. To that end, I have been keeping a personal record of my interactions and projects over the past few months, particularly regarding my colleagues and the museum's operations. I believe this could provide valuable context for our discussion and offer a clearer picture of the work I have been doing. I look forward to meeting with you and am confident that we can resolve any misunderstandings that may have arisen. Best regards, Clara Bennett. I reread the email several times before sending it. There was no anger in my words, no defensiveness. It was simply an invitation to discuss things openly, to shine a light on everything that had been going on behind the scenes. I knew what Iris was doing, her plan to plant seeds of doubt, but now it was time to turn the tables. This wasn't about her. This was about my integrity, my work, and the museum I had dedicated myself to for years. I clicked send and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The ball was in their court now. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, and I spent the rest of the day preparing. I went over the documentation in my gratitude journal, the one Iris hadn't bothered to mention, making sure it was all there. Every positive interaction, every bit of recognition from my colleagues, every collaborative success. I also went through the file I'd been quietly keeping on Iris. Not the formal documentation. No, I was smarter than that. I had collected the small personal details, the things Iris had said to me in passing, the things she'd done to undermine me in front of others. I knew I couldn't rely solely on what was in the journal. It had to be paired with the real, hard evidence that showed what Iris was really like. The manipulation, the constant undermining. It wasn't just about one small error or one mistake. It was about her strategy to take me down, piece by piece. I had everything ready when I arrived at the meeting. Mr. Langford's office was small but well organized, the kind of office that exuded quiet authority. He was already seated at the table when I walked in, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, offering a polite smile. "Clara, please, have a seat." I sat down across from him, my palms slightly sweating, but I refused to show any signs of nerves. This was my moment. "I've read through the reports, Clara," he began, his voice calm. "And I have to admit, some of the concerns raised are troubling. But I also wanted to give you a chance to explain your side of things." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I understand, and I appreciate the opportunity to address these concerns directly. I want to be as transparent as possible. If there are areas where I can improve, I'll take that feedback seriously." Mr. Langford glanced at the file in front of him. "We've received several reports from your colleague Iris regarding your work. She's raised concerns about mishandled artifacts and missed deadlines." I didn't flinch. I had expected this. But I wasn't going to let Iris's accusations define me. "I'm aware of the reports," I said carefully. "And I'm sure Iris believes she's acting in the museum's best interest. But I believe these concerns are being exaggerated. I've been diligent in my work, and I've always met deadlines. But there have been some misunderstandings that I'd like to clear up." I paused, letting that hang in the air for a moment. "There's one thing I think is important to mention. I've been keeping a personal record of my work, not just my successes, but also the moments when things have been challenging. You'll see that I've made every effort to remain professional and maintain the integrity of the museum's collection." I slid the gratitude journal across the table toward him. His eyes flickered with curiosity as he picked it up and flipped through a few pages. "This is unusual. You've kept a record of positive interactions." "Yes," I replied. "It's a way for me to stay focused on the good moments, especially when things get difficult. It helps me stay grounded." He looked up at me, clearly intrigued. "You're documenting your relationships here at the museum?" "I am," I said, "because I believe that our work isn't just about the artifacts we preserve. It's about the relationships we build, both with each other and with the public. I want to make sure I'm contributing to a positive environment." Mr. Langford's gaze softened. He put the journal down and leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate your openness, Clara, but I have to ask, why does Iris's name never appear in here? She's your colleague, after all." I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Iris and we've had some professional disagreements, but I've always tried to keep things respectful. There's no personal animosity, Mr. Langford, but I've made it a point to focus on the people who have supported me here. You'll notice, in my journal, there's an absence of certain individuals, not because I'm ignoring them, but because I don't feel it's necessary to focus on the negative. I watched as Mr. Langford processed my words. He nodded slowly, understanding settling in his expression. "I see," he said after a long pause. "You've been working under difficult circumstances, Clara. And from what I'm seeing here, you've been handling it well. I appreciate your transparency." The weight in the room lifted slightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Iris's game wasn't going to work. Not with me. As I left the meeting, my heart was lighter, but the real battle wasn't over yet. Mr. Langford had listened, and that was a good sign. But I knew Iris wouldn't back down easily. It was time to wait for the next move, but this time, I was ready. The days after my meeting with Mr. Langford were strangely quiet. The tension that had been hanging over me for weeks seemed to evaporate, replaced by a subtle but noticeable shift in the atmosphere at the museum. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. People were suddenly more polite, warmer even. There were fewer awkward silences when I entered the room, fewer sideways glances when I passed by. It wasn't perfect, of course. The whispering still lingered in pockets. Iris, I was sure, was still working her angle, still trying to make me look like the problem. But something had changed, something I hadn't anticipated. The gratitude journal, my carefully documented record of positive interactions, seemed to have had an unintended effect. The more I shared my thoughts with Mr. Langford, the more I noticed the small changes in behavior among my colleagues. By the end of the week, I couldn't deny it. The workplace was different. People were more engaged, more willing to collaborate. I'd catch my colleagues exchanging small smiles across the room. overhear conversations that weren't just about work, but about the people in the museum, the moments they appreciated. It was as if something had clicked, like everyone, for just a moment, had decided to embrace a culture of positivity. Even the junior archivists, who had been so quick to gossip behind my back, were now reaching out to me for help. It wasn't much, but it was something. It felt like, for the first time, I wasn't just a cog in the wheel. I was part of a team. I had always believed in the power of positivity, of fostering an environment where people felt valued, where appreciation wasn't something that needed to be earned, but freely given. But seeing it in action, seeing how it shifted the energy of the entire workplace, was something I had never imagined. And then, there was Iris. She was quieter these days, less confident in her steps. I could see her watching me from the corners of rooms, her eyes narrow and calculating. But there was something in her posture that had changed. She no longer held herself with the same air of authority. She wasn't as sure of herself anymore, and I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my job. I was fighting for the culture of this place, for the team I had helped build despite the obstacles. I watched her more closely now, noting the little things, how she would scan the room to see if anyone was paying attention before making a comment that bordered on undermining, how her small, seemingly innocent suggestions now had a biting edge to them, as if she was trying to subtly twist things to her advantage. She had always played the role of the helpful colleague, but I was starting to see through the facade. One afternoon, as I was walking through the archives, I saw Iris standing in front of the main bulletin board. She was staring at a new edition, a colorful poster with the words Appreciation Week, a celebration of our team, written in bold letters. It was part of the museum's new initiative to celebrate our achievements and contributions, something that had come out of the recent changes in our workplace culture. Iris's eyes lingered on the poster, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could tell she was stewing, watching everyone else getting the recognition they deserved. This was her playground, her turf, and now I was standing in the way of her control. I approached slowly, trying to gauge her reaction. She didn't notice me until I was nearly by her side. "Oh, Clara," she said, her voice tight with forced civility. "How sweet. A whole week dedicated to appreciating the team. How quaint." I glanced at the poster, then back at her. "I think it's a great idea," I said, keeping my tone light, though I could feel the sharp edge of her words hanging in the air. "It's important to recognize the people who make this place what it is." Iris let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "Sure, I suppose it's fine. As long as we're all patting each other on the back and pretending that everything's perfect here. It's not like we have actual problems to deal with, right?" I wasn't going to rise to the bait. Instead, I smiled, a small, quiet smile that held no malice, just calm. It's good to remember what's working. We spend so much time focusing on what needs to be fixed that we forget the small successes, like the fact that we've been able to pull together despite everything. She didn't answer at first, just stared at the poster again, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. I knew she was calculating her next move, thinking about how to turn the situation to her advantage. But something was different. There was a subtle shift in her posture, the way she held herself. She wasn't the same confident, calculating person I had known. She was on the defensive now. "Sure, Clara," she finally said, her voice colder. "I guess some of us enjoy playing the part of the perfect team player." I didn't answer. There was no need to. I turned to leave, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. For the first time, I saw something that wasn't cold calculation or animosity. It was fear. Fear of being exposed for what she really was. Fear that her grip on control was slipping away. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I felt lighter, more confident than I had in weeks. I could sense the growing support from my colleagues, the change in their attitudes. It wasn't just about the poster or the new initiatives. It was about the culture shift I had helped ignite. Slowly but surely, the toxic environment Iris had cultivated was beginning to crumble. By the time the workday ended, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter. The museum wasn't just a place to work anymore. It was a place where people were beginning to genuinely appreciate each other. And that, more than anything, was my victory. Iris's attempts to control everything had failed. The culture was changing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. A few days later, as I walked into the museum, I felt a strange sense of calm. There had been a shift, something subtle but powerful. Iris's grip on the team was loosening, and I was starting to see cracks in the walls she had built. People were more willing to collaborate, more open in their interactions. The museum, once tense with competition and distrust, was slowly becoming a place of shared purpose again. I had no doubt that Iris was plotting her next move. She was stubborn, and if there was one thing I had learned about her over the months, it was that she wouldn't give up easily. But I was prepared. I had already turned the tide. The moment I stood up to her, the moment I showed that I wasn't afraid to expose her tactics, everything started to shift. That afternoon, I received a message that made my heart skip a beat. It was from Mr. Langford, the museum director. "Clara, could you please join me in my office? I'd like to discuss a few things regarding the recent situation with Iris." I stared at the message for a moment, my mind racing. The situation with Iris. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. Iris had been playing her game, but I had been playing mine. And now it was time for the truth to come out. I stood up from my desk and walked to Mr. Langford's office with a steady pace, each step resonating with purpose. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I had nothing to hide. And now it was Iris's turn to face the consequences of her actions. When I entered Mr. Langford's office, I found him seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, carefully observing him as he set aside a folder and folded his hands in front of him. "Clara," he began, his voice calm but with an edge of seriousness, "I've been reviewing the reports and discussing the situation with several of your colleagues. I want to be transparent with you. There's been some troubling feedback about Iris's behavior." I didn't flinch. I had expected this moment, and I had prepared for it. "What kind of feedback?" I asked, keeping my voice even, my posture open. Mr. Langford leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface of the desk. "There have been multiple reports of manipulation, particularly involving you. Some of the things we've heard about Iris's actions, well, they've raised serious concerns." I nodded slowly. "I'm not surprised to hear that," I said softly. "I've been aware of her actions for some time now, but I believe the issues go beyond just me." Mr. Langford raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Iris has been trying to undermine not just my work, but the work of others around here," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "She's been using small mistakes, real or imagined, to create doubt and suspicion. She's been spreading misinformation, trying to make me appear incompetent." There was a pause, and I could see that Mr. Langford was processing what I was saying. He wasn't dismissing it outright, but I could tell he was still gathering his thoughts. "You're telling me she's been targeting you?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of disbelief. "Not just me," I replied. "I've seen her do it to other people too. She's been manipulating situations, pitting colleagues against each other, all to create an environment where she's the one in control. She's the one with the answers, the solutions, even when there's nothing wrong to begin with." Mr. Langford took a deep breath, his expression softening. "Clara, I had no idea. I've been reviewing the situation carefully, but I wasn't fully aware of the extent of her actions. You've always been an asset to this museum, and I don't want any of this to tarnish your reputation." I met his gaze, my voice unwavering. "I'm not worried about my reputation, Mr. Langford. I'm worried about the culture here. If this kind of behavior is allowed to continue, it's only going to hurt the museum. It's about more than just one person. This is about the entire team and the integrity of our work." He nodded slowly, clearly impressed by my resolve. "I understand, Clara, and I appreciate your honesty. We've had a meeting with Iris already, and I've made it clear that her behavior is unacceptable. She's been put on notice, and I've made it clear that any further attempts to undermine her colleagues will not be tolerated." A surge of relief ran through me, though I kept my expression neutral. Iris had been warned, but I knew this wasn't the end. She wouldn't back down quietly. She would be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. "I appreciate your handling of this, Mr. Langford," I said, my tone sincere. "But I have to ask, what happens now?" Mr. Langford sighed, leaning forward slightly. "We're going to keep a close eye on the situation. We're working on putting measures in place to prevent this kind of behavior from happening again. But I need to ask, are you willing to continue working here? I know this has been difficult for you." I didn't hesitate. "I'm committed to this museum. I want to see it succeed. But I can't do that if the team is divided and trust is broken. His gaze softened as he nodded. I understand. We'll make sure you have the support you need moving forward. I stood up, feeling a sense of resolution settling over me. Thank you, Mr. Langford. I believe in the museum's mission. I'm ready to move forward and help rebuild the trust we've lost. He smiled, offering a firm handshake. I'm confident we'll get back on track, Clara. We're lucky to have you. As I left his office, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift from my shoulders. Iris's manipulation had failed. The truth had come out, and now the museum was moving in a direction I could believe in again. It wasn't just about my victory. It was about the future of the museum, about the people who worked here and the integrity we all shared. But I knew this wasn't over. Iris was still a threat, and the battle wasn't won yet. I had one more thing to do. I walked past the staff room, where I saw Iris standing by the coffee machine. Her back turned to me. I could feel her presence, feel the tension in the air, but I didn't stop. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. Not yet. But it would come. And when it did, she would know. She had underestimated me, and I was ready to finish this once and for all. Weeks passed, and I let the dust settle. The tension in the museum slowly began to fade as people started to return to their work, as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. The new positive culture I had helped foster in the face of adversity started to take root. Conversations in the halls were no longer laced with suspicion or gossip. Instead, they were filled with light-hearted chatter, shared stories of successes, and even laughter that didn't feel forced. Iris, on the other hand, was quieter now, much quieter. She still came to work every day, still carried herself with that air of authority she had tried to claim. But something had shifted. She was no longer the center of attention in the way she once had been. People, including myself, were no longer feeding into her game. She was starting to fade into the background, trying desperately to maintain some semblance of control. But it was obvious she was no longer the queen of this particular battlefield. I had not heard from Mr. Langford in a while, which I took as a good sign. His words echoed in my mind. We've put measures in place. I trusted that the higher-ups had taken the necessary steps to ensure that Iris's behavior wouldn't go unchecked again. The museum was moving forward, and so was I. A couple of weeks after my meeting with Mr. Langford, I received an unexpected email. It was brief, but significant. It was from HR. Dear Clara, we wanted to inform you that we've completed the review process, and we've decided on the next steps. Given the findings and the positive feedback from your colleagues, we believe it's important to recognize your leadership during this challenging time. As such, we would like to offer you the role of senior archivist. I sat back, the weight of the words sinking in. Senior archivist. It was a recognition I hadn't sought out, but one that felt like a validation of all the work I had put in over the years. It was a quiet victory, but it was mine. I took a moment to compose myself. The triumph wasn't about the title or the recognition. It was about knowing I had done the right thing. I had stood my ground when it mattered. I had taken control of my own narrative, and I had never compromised my integrity. I looked at the email once more, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I prepared my response. Thank you for the recognition. I'm honored by the offer, and I look forward to continuing to contribute to the success of the museum. I'm excited about the future and the work we can accomplish as a team. I hit send, feeling the finality of it. I had won. Not because of a title, but because I had done what was right. I had fought for myself, for my colleagues, and for the culture of the place that had been my home for so long. That evening, as I left the museum for the day, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for months. The world outside the museum was quieter too, the sounds of the city blending into the rhythm of my footsteps. I walked slowly, savoring the simple joy of having everything fall into place. As I neared my car, I caught sight of something that made me pause. A small group of my colleagues, laughing together by the steps of the museum. They were talking about something trivial, something light, but I realized then how far we had come. There was no longer the weight of doubt in the air, no more subtle tension or uncomfortable silences. The museum had become what it was always meant to be, a place where people could truly work together, support one another, and thrive. I smiled to myself as I unlocked my car door. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something larger than myself. I had faced the storm. I had taken on Iris, the accusations, the gossip. And now I was walking out stronger than before. And as I drove home that night, the hum of the engine was almost like a lullaby. It wasn't the end, I knew that. But it was a quiet victory, a victory that would echo for a long time to come. In the end, it wasn't about being the best. It wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about building a culture where toxicity couldn't thrive, where integrity and kindness could shine through, no matter how hard someone tried to tear it down. And that was the victory that mattered most.